Welcome everybody to the Eaton Arrowsmith virtual tour. Excited to have you here, and people who may have some familiarity with what we're doing in the field of disabilities. And for those who are brand new, to introduce you to a concept in special education that may bring a lot of interest to you and excitement to your knowledge base. So thank you for coming, and Josh and I are excited to be presenting. I'm excited that Josh is doing a live presentation of one of the cognitive exercises called symbol relations. And I'm excited to watch Josh present this live to those who are attending. So let's get going. So this is me wanting to be a hockey star back in the 1970s. When the Vancouver Canucks joined the NHL, and I was doing horribly in school. I was failing grade 1 and grade 2 because I couldn't read, I couldn't spell. I had dysgraphia, which was the written output disability. I couldn't form my letters properly. I struggled with written output, but I also had trouble with phonics and sound symbol relationships. And I wanted to do anything but go to school. And so I said to my mom and dad, I think in grade 3, joining the NHL would be the best decision they could make for me. And I got my Canuck jersey on and my hockey stick, and my parents were doing whatever they could to help with my self-esteem. And my dad took a picture of me in front of our house on Marguerite Street in Vancouver. In the background, you can see my little sister, Daphne, who was jealous that her brother was going to be a hockey star and couldn't be in the picture. But my parents did everything they could to get my self-esteem going. But I was a very early struggler in school and was actually suicidal by the time I was in grade 5. Didn't want to go to school, wanted to end my life. I was seeing a psychiatrist, child psychiatrist in Vancouver, very famous one called Dr. Carl Klein, who was very familiar with dyslexia and the Orton-Gillingham method. And him and his wife, Caroline, they're both now deceased, but brought the Orton-Gillingham program to Vancouver, Canada. And I had one of their first Orton-Gillingham tutors that they tutored, that they trained to tutor me. And so I left school, I quit school in 1975. And was actually left school in 1973, was homeschooled, had Orton-Gillingham tutoring. And eventually my child psychiatrist said to my parents, there's a school in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Again, I was in Vancouver. Bucks County, Pennsylvania was on the West Coast. On the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. And by the time I was 10 years old, 11 years old, the child psychiatrist recommended I went to a private school for boys with dyslexia called the Kildonan School to save my life, and teach me how to read and write, and hopefully get me to a point where I could graduate from high school. In fact, my parents had thought about purchasing a farm for me in Langley, BC, in case I never got through school and I needed a job. They thought that farming could be an opportunity for me. And fortunately, I had a chance to go to the Kildonan School, receive some great Orton-Gillingham tutoring, and gave me the confidence to get back into school and try to make it through junior high and high school. But what was interesting is it was still a struggle. Even though I could read better, my spelling had improved, my writing was acceptable. Sitting in class and listening to lectures was still difficult. Getting through reading material and comprehending what I was reading at a fairly efficient rate of speed was a struggle. And so I still, even though I had great Orton-Gillingham tutoring, I still struggled with reading speed, reading comprehension, listening to lectures. Any kind of foreign language was a difficulty. And fortunately, through a lot of sweat and a lot of tutorial support, I got through high school. And my parents, my dad at the time said, you should go to university. And I actually didn't want to go to university because school was so hard. But I got accepted through some sort of kindness to a university in California. And within 2 months, I had failed out of university because I couldn't keep up with the schoolwork. So my dyslexia still impacted me. Even though I could read, my spelling was efficient, I didn't have the brain power, I didn't have the neurological capability to keep up with the academic load. And I left university and started working as a dishwasher at Carlos and Bud's Tex-Mex restaurant in Vancouver, British Columbia, thinking I'd have to find a career that didn't include university. But given somehow I had this fortitude or this resilience to keep punishing myself, I re-enrolled at university and decided I'd be a social worker or a psychologist. And I had to take a foreign language at the same time. And I didn't understand that foreign language exemptions were possible. They weren't in Vancouver at the time at the University of British Columbia. So I enrolled again at UBC, tried to do a foreign language and failed the foreign language and failed all my courses. For a second time, I left university and said, okay, that's it. I'm going to try to find a career in carpentry or something that I could use my hands, which I was good at. And then I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, who was brilliant. And she was going to Stanford University. And I said, well, maybe I could try this again and re-enroll at UBC. If I was going to keep this girlfriend who was really brilliant, I think I have to find a way to get to university. And so I made a second attempt in psychology and just worked and worked and worked and worked. I gave up soccer. I studied 7 days a week, 14, 15 hours a day, and got through university and got my bachelor's in psychology. And then was accepted at Boston University to do a master's in special education. And they were interested in me because I was an adult with dyslexia who had made it through university. And they thought, hey, let's give this guy a chance at graduate school. And I did my best I ever did academically at graduate school. So I have this ingrained desire to help people who are struggling with learning due to my own experience. And I got into, once I finished my master's degree at Boston University, I was doing some PhD work at Simon Fraser University. I'd moved back to Vancouver. And I started my own psychoeducational assessment business with a group of psychologists and started testing kids with learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder with these registered psychologists, and provided tutoring support and self-advocacy training. And one of these parents had heard about this woman named Barbara Arrowsmith Young. And this was in 2002, 2001. So over 23 years ago, over 2 decades ago, and said, have you heard of Barbara Arrowsmith Young? She's out of Toronto. She talks about improving brain functioning. And at first I was a skeptic because I was trained in graduate school that the brain was fixed. Learning disabilities are lifelong. Once you have a learning disability, you have to struggle with it your whole life, and you need technology and accommodations and tutoring support and test taking alternatives for high school and university. So I was in a paradigm that the brain was fixed. So it took me a while to even listen to these parents about this woman, Barbara Arrowsmith Young. And eventually I started tuning in when a third and a fourth parent were coming to me to have their child tested and said, have you heard about brain plasticity and neuroplasticity? And I got curious, and I've always been curious, always been sort of open to new ideas. And I phoned this Barbara Arrowsmith Young, and I said, what are you guys up to? What are you doing? She was in Vancouver. I had a meeting with her downtown Vancouver, and I was amazed at her intelligence, her humbleness, her passion to help people with learning challenges. And then these families started moving to Toronto, from Vancouver to do this Arrowsmith program. And I said to them, after you're done, can you come back and we'll do an updated psychoeducational assessment? I want to see, what are their cognitive functioning is like. Have they improved cognitive functioning? Because usually when you do an updated psychoed assessment, the cognitive functioning is just as bad or it's worse. You don't usually get improvement in cognitive functioning. That's why learning disabilities are considered definitionally lifelong. So these families came back and we did the updated psychoeducational assessments, and I started seeing these significant shifts in cognitive functioning in areas of reasoning, memory, attention, fluid intelligence, or type of intelligence where you're learning novel things. And I said, wow, I've never seen this before. And then a second child comes back and a third child comes back, and it was the same results, and it just floored me. It was one of those aha moments you have in life where you say, you know, I need to know more about what Barbara Arrowsmith Young is doing. And so I flew to Toronto and visited her school and talked to the, I don't know, 10, 20 parents, talked to all the kids, talked to the teachers, spent time with Barbara Arrowsmith Young. And I left Pearson Airport, flying in the plane, headed to Vancouver, saying, I'm going to start a school in Vancouver. And everyone's going to be excited because I see it. Everyone's going to be amazed that there's this program in Vancouver to improve cognitive functioning. Well, brain plasticity can be a bad thing, meaning you can get so ingrained in your way of thinking that you can't break into novel or ideas that are counter your mindset. And I found a lot of resistance when I started the school in Vancouver. People were upset at me for betraying Orton Gillingham method of phonics, that this was a program that didn't have enough scientific evidence. And it was mostly the families that I had tested that followed me to our school in Vancouver. And that sort of shifted my whole life, where I became less interested in psychoeducational testing and more interested in starting the school. And in fact, you know, wrote the book Brain School, which is about, you know, case studies of kids who have improved cognitive functioning, which was exciting to get out. So what I said to Barbara when we started the school, I wanted to do research on brain imaging on the brain, because I had the psychoeducational pre and post measures of improvement, but I wanted to work with researchers that were actually looking at the brain and looking at brain plasticity and brain change, and said, Barbara, it would be so important in your research to actually have scientific evidence that the brain changed with your program. And she was in full agreement. She's always been excited about doing research. And so we had Dr. Lara Boyd over at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Neuroscience and Medicine take on the research project. And we raised philanthropy over $1 million to do this research. And what we decided to do was study one of the programs that Barbara did. And this is the same program that Josh Poirier is going to talk about, symbol relations. We also use the term clocks to describe it. And so we wanted to study one program, one of Barbara's interventions, and look at it over essentially a 3-month period of time, and take interval measures like at 1 month and then 3 months. And we also lined up additional research with Dr. Greg Rose at Southern Illinois University, who was also into brain imaging and was also going to do additional research over in that part of the United States. So we had 2 major research projects going, one at UBC, one at Southern Illinois University, doing a lot of similar replications of research, because it's often important to see, you know, 2 different studies showing the same results and outcomes. And what was cool was that we were able to create the clocks exercise in a functional MRI machine. So our students would be put into a functional MRI machine. They'd look up and they would see a 2-handed clock that might say 1:30. And they were asked whether the answer 1:30 was right or wrong, and had to press a button, yes or no, with their fingers. The left hand was yes, the right hand was no, because you can't have a lot of motor movement. And what the research wanted to know was, could they see improved brain connectivity between brain regions responsible for telling time with an analog clock? And over the period of the research, the kids were pre-tested, and then they were involved in doing the program, Symbol Relations, that Josh will show you. And then they went into the functional MRI machine after treatment, and they looked at their brain and their brain connectivity. And what you see here in this slide is this wonderful array of colored wires. It's essentially the large scale brain networks in your brain. And so the top of the screen is where the eyeballs would be, and the back is where the back of the brain is. And the color codes indicate just how a certain large scale brain network will intertwine different regions of the brain. And these sort of large scale brain networks, these wirings, connect our ability to reason, to memorize information, to process information quickly. And there's a level of connectivity that allows you to sort of operate within the average environment. So if you're in a child's in a classroom, these large-scale brain networks need to communicate different regions of the brain in order to sort of understand information in real time. And what you often see with learning disabilities is sort of a lag time, where they're just trying to process the first bit of information in the class, and then the teacher goes to the next one and the kid is lost, or they lose focus. It's because the researchers are finding these large-scale brain networks are not connecting properly, efficiently, and sending impulses back and forth between brain regions. And what we're seeing with learning disabilities is the brain is hyper-connected usually, meaning that these large-scale brain networks aren't being used efficiently. There's a lot of activity taking place, and that results in sort of neural exhaustion, where students with learning disabilities or adults with learning disabilities become overwhelmed with information, fatigued neurologically, and then just can zone out. A lot of attention deficit disorders are due to cognitive neural connectivity problems, not to a neurotransmitter that are often used with medication. The brain is just overwhelmed because it can't keep up. This connectivity is not fine-tuned, it's not developed properly. And we're actually seeing this not just in learning disabilities like dyslexia, but also in things like attention deficit disorder. We're seeing this in autism spectrum disorder. We're seeing this in concussion, for example, and we're seeing this in the aging brain. As we age, our neural connectivity weakens. So the question was, does Barbara's program, Symbol Relations, fine-tune these brain networks so they show more average connectivity? And what we saw that after treatment, we didn't see the hyperconnectivity. The brain was operating, these large-scale networks were operating more efficiently before and after. And we also saw really significant improvements in measures of things like fluid intelligence, processing speed, memory. We did all these pre and post cognitive measures. And we also saw improvements in social emotional outcomes in terms of less anxiety, depression, those kind of things. And this was a slide from Dr. Greg Rose and his team at Southern Illinois University, just further validating the impact, not just on cognitive performance. So if you go to a psych ed assessment, they'll often do measures of processing speed, cognitive efficiency, reasoning, and we wanted to do those same measures. These are the measures I did with the students when I first heard about Arrowsmith. These are the same results I saw on measures of the Woodcock-Johnson that the researchers were seeing independently. So I knew I wasn't making things up in my mind. What I was seeing was the same thing researchers were seeing, but also on the academic side, they were also seeing improvements in things like reading comprehension, reading speed, writing speed, decision-making speed. These are all areas when I was a young boy, I continued to struggle with, even after some of the world's best Orton Gillingham reading, decoding methodology. And so I knew if we could change a child's ability or adult's ability to operate in the real world in real time, we would have even a more dramatic shift in quality of life outcomes than if we did just say a reading program like Orton Gillingham alone. And this is what's driven me and my passion to bring this work forward is we can do so much more for kids and adults than before. And are we seeing improvements in quality of life? And these are comments from the researchers themselves, both at UBC, at the University of Calgary, who analyzed some data, and the researchers at Southern Illinois University. I won't read through each one of them, but essentially they said Arrowsmith is changing the brain in ways that improve quality of life outcomes that even these researchers were quite surprised about, because they're also used to the old paradigm that you live with cognitive challenges, you find ways to bypass them, you find careers that don't highlight these cognitive weaknesses. And I think that type of perspective is so limiting on individual capability that I think this is, again, what drives my passion, is that children and adults who are struggling with all sorts of types of disabilities, there's so much more that can be available to them by improving these large-scale brain networks and this functioning. And so, again, I want to thank you for listening to my passion, and I'm excited for Josh to walk through one of these cognitive exercises, because you'll begin to see how much is involved in mastering something like symbol relations. So thanks, Josh.
Great, thanks, Howard. Um, Similar to like our stories start often the same way, and we hear these from families all over. We've tried a lot. We don't really know why things aren't working, and that's kind of what my parents did for me. When I was 16 years old, I woke up on a Saturday morning with assessors in my dining room, and my parents wanted to figure out like why aren't his grades matching with the intelligence that we see. Like there has to be a disconnect here. What's going on? So I had an assessment done and was diagnosed with ADD as a 16-year-old. At that later age, different types of things can pop up. For me, I saw the school start to give up. Oh, it's not our fault. He's not doing well. He's got ADD. We've got a resource room we can put him in, give him some extra time on some tests, see how that helps. For me, like I had to get my grades up. I had scholarship opportunities. I could throw a baseball fast, and that opened some doors for me to get into university, have a couple options to push forward when, I could have just put it on cruise control, but, I wanted to be eligible. I needed to be eligible. So what did that mean? Putting significant amount of hours into my education. When I got into university, it was about 7-8 hours a day, just living out of the library, going home at the end of the day exhausted. And that was my version of Arrowsmith. Really I was English and history double major, which is a lot of content that you have to get through, a lot of writing, and being able to stay in that prefrontal zone really helped me overcome that. I don't wish that on anybody. And I don't say that hard work, is needed and everyone needs to be able to do that. Like if you can digest the same amount of content and be able to understand everything at a high level without needing to put in all that work, that's what Arrowsmith kind of delivers. For me, like what they call that is kind of a late bloomer. I started coming around later in my development. It really was all of the extra effort that I had to put in to get to that point. So by the time I was, a third, fourth year of university in my undergrad, realizing like, hey, school's actually kind of fun. I like the work. I like the challenge. It's not as threatening anymore as my capacity was improving with the hard work I was putting in. And I was able to get my master's in education as well. And, started with Arrowsmith close to 12 years ago. I'm going into my 12th year next year. And really from a place of not knowing anything about Arrowsmith to 3 years later engaging in brain injury research, that really led to a big interest for me in figuring out how these fields merge. So the science of the brain, how the brain learns, and education, my interpretation and my thought process was these are a natural fit. Like all curriculum must be made over how the brain works and how students learn. And what I quickly found out was that that's just not the case. There's gaps in educational care. We see that in the accommodation-driven supports. You need this level of support or this or that level of support to be able to get through. But in the real world, once you graduate, that's just not the case, right? You don't have that same level of support. So at what stage does that bring success or failure is really different for everybody, but it is present. Reliance on these support networks over a long period of time, it really becomes something people expect and feel that they need. And that builds a lack of independence. I need constant support. Who's going to help me with this? Like, that's just not how the world works. Unfortunately, the support and independence is not really there. Like, you need to be able to work on your own and focus on your own and do your job, and find success on your terms based on those expectations, and the support's not there anymore. And what I really saw was, as we got into the brain injury studies that we started at that time, we had ongoing research going on for learning disability at the same time as well. But I saw a big difference within rehabilitation versus accommodation. So what we're really focusing on is, building up these networks, focusing on the areas to be able to give them more potential, more efficient connectivity. And one of the healthcare comparisons that I kind of use in my everyday discussion is like the idea of treatment. So if I was to break an arm I would go and get an x-ray. Okay, do I need surgery or just a cast? Let's say I just need a cast. So I'd put the cast on. 6 to 8 weeks later, I get the cast cut off. We're going to check the strength now. So I'm going to work on my strength with a physiotherapist or a team to be able to build that strength up, because 2 arms is definitely better than just one, right? So if we look at how education works these days, we would see, okay, if you broke your arm, they would say like, okay, well, you have one really good arm. So why don't we tie your bad arm to your side, right? And let's just focus on all the things you can do really well, right? What happens with that is we know that 2 arms is better than one. But if we're only focusing on our strengths, we're only focusing on our current abilities, it builds an imbalance within the brain where certain networks are being worked and exercised and building more healthy connectivity where other areas are being neglected. And we're seeing an increase in anxiety and depression in children these days. And there's a lot of people going around saying like, well, it's technology, kids are on, that's COVID. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not saying one is right and everyone's very different, one is wrong. But the truth of the matter is, in schools, are we really helping to build functional connectivity within these networks that are underdeveloped or underworking? And in the case that, what if we only really exercised one half of our body, we know that would be different. Like even in baseball, which is a sport I've been connected to my whole life, you'd see major league pitchers where one arm is gigantic, one leg is gigantic, and the other side of the body is kind of normal. Or you see this in weightlifting where someone neglects their lower body and have these chicken legs with a giant upper body. You're more likely to injure your legs because the muscle groups aren't solid. So if we compare it to the body, it does make sense. When we look at the brain, there's still so much research that needs to be done to really understand the brain better. But what we do know is regions are made to perform tasks better than other regions. The same reason why your heart wouldn't digest food, right? The heart has a role to push oxygen and blood through our body, and our stomach is made to really break down food, right? The same way our left brain is more created to analyze, organize, prioritize, and our right brain is made to read people, emotions, and situations, right? We need both of those areas working well and connected well together to be able to function appropriately and build potential and live in the past and future to be able to understand the present that we're seeing. And a lot of parents, when they're going through this process, are really looking at that goal of graduation, right? If my kid can just graduate, that means that they're going to be able to achieve all of these goals. What can we do to get to that point, right? And schools are saying the same thing, like, what do we need to do to get this kid through? How do we get to their grades to a point where they're graduating, right? And we end up putting these supports in place that aren't consistent within their life after this, because the goal of education really is to graduate. It's not to have well-rounded, well-connected human beings leaving. So we really like to see that balance within the brain to be able to function in any task with ease. So why aren't these supports solving either the short-term or long-term problems? Well, what do we know about neuroplasticity? Okay, so first of all, neurons that fire together wire together. And this is a quote I've seen over my 12 years, and it really rings true to me in our work with neuroplasticity, that whichever area of the brain is firing up based on a specific task, that area is going to create connectivity and create new connections, and functional connectivity is very important. So repetitive exercise that stimulates specific regions of the brain can help improve functional connectivity in the region the behavior lies, right? So if we need to build our ability to have compassion for others, have empathy, read and understand how we're feeling in situations, you're really going to want to focus on that right side of the brain that does that task. Right? So the brain's continuously trying to find the fastest route. So millions of times within our brain over and over, which can often, as Howard was speaking to, can lead to hyperconnectivity, right? So where there's too much going on. And we're seeing this in a lot of our research where the frontal lobe was overstimulated. There was 5 to 10 times more electrical activity in those frontal lobes, right? And I like to use the example of, like, depending on which country you're in, we're in a lot of different countries, but let's say you're in the US, you wanted to get to New York and you're from LA, right? You would go to the airport in LA, you would jump on a plane, you'd probably pick a movie or put on an album or put on an audio book or pull out a book. You land in New York, you're there, you're doing what you want to do, going to Times Square, going to a Yankees game, right? And you have all your energy in that day, right? However, the way that the brain works for people with learning challenges can often mean that, okay, I get to the airport at LAX. Now I got to connect over to Chicago. I've got to connect down to Dallas. I've got to connect to Newark, and now I'm going up to JFK. You still get from LA to New York, right? But how much extra energy and attention did your brain need to put towards this task to be able to get from A to B, right? So when the brain is trying to find a new way to solve every problem and reinvent the wheel constantly, it can create a lot of fatigue in the brain. It can create our limbic system to activate because our frontal lobes aren't connecting the way that they should, or they're overstimulated. And that can lead to our amygdala coming on. That can lead to post-traumatic stress in some situations where our brain activity is actually deviating from our problem-solving region, our prefrontal cortex, to other parts of our brain that are then taking the lead. So one solution, which is why many of you are here to learn a little bit more about, is what we do at Eaton Arrowsmith School. So we have different options. This isn't only about online. Yes, online is great for those who aren't living close to one of our locations or Arrowsmith location around the world. But on site, we have 2 schools, one in Vancouver and one just outside of Seattle in Redmond, Washington. These are typical school day schedules, 5 days a week. There's full and part-time options for half days and part-time as well. And they both have academic options for their students as well. Online, we are 4-day-a-week program, so 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. classes. We also have a class on the weekend. It's part-time to suit your schedule. Some students add in 2 periods per day, 3 periods per day, 4 periods per day. And they're typically working on areas that are going to make the biggest need for them in that moment, almost like a triage based on what the needs are for that student, without coming out of their everyday support system or social networks or school to disrupt that. So we are currently in 11 countries. We've been in 21 countries, I believe. And that's the benefit of being online, is you can really engage from anywhere. We have students that travel, they just bring their computer. It doesn't stop them from engaging in the program. It really does, in terms of our offerings, give anyone an opportunity to engage. So for those that are interested, we encourage you to meet with Sandra Husel. Her email's there. She's in the chat room right now, and she'd be happy to answer questions for you as well, because we really want to shift that thought process to surviving, from surviving to thriving. Thriving is important in school. Being able to manage anything that's coming at you is important, rather than just getting through the day. And where we like to typically start is with an executive function, right? So if our ability to take in information, understand the world, process everything at a good speed is working right, we should be able to thrive in any situation. So we work on 4 different areas to be able to target these. We do an assessment when students come in to figure out which is the appropriate place to start. The activity that I'll be sharing with you momentarily would typically be symbol relations or clocks that I'll give more detail on. We also work on left hemisphere thinking, so symbolic thinking we call, and right hemisphere thinking, which is nonverbal thinking. Also the connection from our frontal lobes to our hippocampus through predicated speech, our working memory, to be able to extend our attention span for detail and also organize speech coming in. Depending on what the assessments show, we could start on any one of these. I really like to start on symbol relations. It's almost the marionette of the brain where you're pulling everything up. You're seeing more things that are happening at once, making more connections, which leads to better memories, leads to more attention. And that is typically the optimal starting point. So why clock? So clocks really is the connection from the right prefrontal cortex to the left through the corpus callosum. So it links these two sides to be able to understand the world a bit better. And research has shown when this area is working as it should for the age of the student, that there was less noise in the frontal lobes, as I was talking about, more effective connectivity, which helped with focus and stamina, and equals less of a likelihood for the fight or flight response to kick in. Right. So when the frontal lobes are working calmly and efficiently, there are global improvements that can set the brain up for future improvements at a higher level. So I'd like to do a little demonstration here in a second. So symbol relations, generally this area, and a big reason why we start is there's a lot of different things that this will help with. Right. And the biggest example that I like to look at is, as we look there, I won't read through all of these, they're on your screen there, is how can this help? How can this tool that we are so conditioned to know that this means time actually help with our understanding and processing of the world? Okay, so when we're looking at a clock, we're very conditioned, typically from the kindergarten age, to know that this means time, right? Like when's recess, when's lunch, when's recess, when can I go home? And then for me, it's like when's gym class, when's art, when are these fun things that I can associate to this clock? And then it builds into all, okay, I've got to get up at 7 o'clock to be able to take a shower, have breakfast, to be able to get to school for 8:15, from 8:15, and you start to build around what this means. It's just a circle with lines and numbers. Right? Our brain puts structure and meaning to this. And it typically does that through the organization from the right to the left hemisphere. How I like to explain this on a little bit of a deeper level is our right brain reads more information, understands emotion, understands what's happening in social situations, empathy, typically associated with music and art. That's more reading the circles and the lines here. Whereas our left brain organizes details, numbers, prioritization, finding the main idea in things, putting a lot of information together to decide what's appropriate. That's more reading the numbers here. So as our right and our left brain communicate in reading this tool, we're using both hemispheres. They're lighting up, they're creating a connection across to really build that direct flight from one side of the brain to the other. All right. So this is our platform. There's a lot of activities that students can engage in at any time. And I will hop into clock. So as students log in, they can see data, they can understand how they're doing, they can understand what they've been working on. They can see how many hours within the week they've been working. This is my demo account that I use. So I'm kind of at the reds here. Some days I'm doing more, other days I'm doing less. But as a student, I can see how much more do I need to engage? How many more hours do I need to put in? And am I meeting my goals? So as they go in, it would give more information. And now I'm looking at this clock. So I'm on a two-handed level here, right? As I'm going through, my goal would be to go at a speed at a certain percentage to be able to build mastery, okay? And what I'm doing in that sense is typing in the time. So 6, 9, 4, 5, 8, 6, 9, 2, 10, 29. I'll get one wrong here. 2, 12. Okay, so I got one wrong. It lets me know that, okay, I've got to fix it. I'm going back in. Okay, oh, I see what I did wrong. It's actually 2, 11. And now I keep going through. We don't want to get hung up on wrong things. The need for control is often there for students with challenges too. To prove that they know what they're doing. We can get hung up on that. The perfectionism can come out on that. We do want to try to get over that within this. The whole point of this is for me not to have to put thought to this task. If we're learning how to ride a bike, and if we look back to when we started riding a bike or driving a car, right? There's a lot of things that we need to organize at once, right? Before you know it, you're riding with your hands off of your steering, right? You're doing wheelies, you're jumping off curbs. But when you started, you were on your training wheels and you were trying to figure out how to steer and how to pedal at the same time, your brain's putting so much cognition to that task. To a few years later, you're riding your bike to the store to get a Slurpee with your friends, you're in deep conversations, right? You're not putting thought to that same task. That's the goal we're trying to aim for here, where I'm just typing the time in and I'm not worried about what the actual time on the clock is. I'm just going through and trying to get faster and faster to the point where, okay, I've proven that I can get to the level that I want to get to. And now I need it to be more complicated. So then we'll add hands. So now I have a second hand here. And you'll notice that it's harder to tell on this one because it's only 9 seconds after. The minute hand's no longer pointing right to the 41 on this. It's on its way to 42, but not quite there. And I need to understand the relationship of this clock almost as fast as I was understanding the relationship with the two-handed. And even speaking at the same time, for me, brings in a whole new element, right? Because my focus isn't right on it. So, okay, I've got to get my focus back. Okay, it's actually 3, 41, 9, 10. And now is this 2 or 3? So this is the process that my brain's starting to process. Because when I was on two-handed clocks, I know that this is going to be pointing right at a number here, but now it's not. So the novelty of adding in that hand, which is just like training wheels are off. Now I need to balance, right? Now I'm learning how to go from an automatic transmission to now I need to learn the clutch. I need to learn where my hand goes, where my feet go, right? There's more to come into it to really make it more complicated. So, okay, no, it's not 3, it's 2, but in 13 seconds, it's going to be 3. So that would be 47. So I'm going through this process in a different way, even though it's only one more hand.
Hey, Josh, can I talk about the networks just quickly?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So what Josh, when you have this analog clock, the three-handed clock, these large scale brain networks that I talked to you about that connect different regions of the brain are activated. So one of the first networks that you need to pay attention on a task, and that's the default mode network has to be activated to show a focus on a specific objective. So that default network in your brain is engaged. And then you need to know, what do I need to look at, which is sort of what's important to know, which is the saliency network. So another network gets connected and activated. And so the saliency network gets connected with, oh, what do I need to figure out here? What's important to know? And it's just like in reading, when you're reading a book, your brain first has to connect to the reading materials, the default mode network, then it has to engage in what's important to know. And then if eventually it gets to a point where Josh has to act on a decision, which is another network of the human brain. So Josh has to make a decision. So all these large scale brain networks, like 4 of the most major large scale brain networks, are engaged during this activity, which begin to strengthen in connectivity with the more repetition you make. And this makes the brain more effective in most learning processes, whether it's reading comprehension, math problem solving, learning science. And when I first came across this exercise, visiting Toronto in 2004, over almost 2 decades ago, I said to Barbara, what does the clocks exercise do? She, well, reading comprehension, math problem solving. And I was just beginning to grasp her knowledge of neuroscience. And I said, Barbara, for years, when a parent comes in and tells me my child can't read time on an analog clock, I say, oh, I have an answer, get a digital clock. They don't need to tell time on an analog clock. And oh man, I wish I could phone the 2,000 kids I assessed and apologize to the parents and said, no, you shouldn't have listened to me. It was the first sign that your child was going to have major learning challenges, and we should have actually taught them time. But Barbara's methodology is so remarkable in terms of motivating kids and adults to achieve higher and higher levels. But this exercise improves this connectivity of large-scale brain networks, which is the magic of this. And we actually saw it live on functional MRI machines. Sorry, Josh.
No, great. That's great information. Allow me to focus a bit more as I listen in to get to this.
Mastered.
Right. So once you have mastered a level, you've shown that you have understood it at a point where we can move on. you get something like this that comes on the screen, right? That lets you know, okay, you've mastered this, great job, ready to move on, ready to make it more complex, right? This is what our students are going for. This is where the celebration happens. I will be moving on now to more complex levels that will help to bring my brain to an understanding and create a functional connection between my right and the left hemispheres in terms of this activity. And this is kind of the goal that we're working towards. Through this process, we track all of the data online. Like, I'm not sitting in a room with 25 kids here as I'm working with another teacher to go around, meet everyone's need. I need some way to know that everyone's working, to know when they need attention, when they need information, and we have data going nonstop. So on my side, I've got a tablet with all the data coming through, able to change my levels, look at everyone's coming through in real time. And we do this by this back-end system through Arrowsmith that has been developed really over the last 7 years to put this onto the internet with this level, with the data at this level, which is great. And every month we're sending home different graphs showing progress, giving engagement scores, right? Like, if your engagement really is everything with this work, like if you register to go to the gym, okay, I'm going to get myself together, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, I'm going to get all this strength. Then I show up at the gym. I'm on my phone in the corner, looking up new workout plans. Like, I don't know about this one. I don't know about this one. Like, well, what's on Instagram right now? Right? Like, I'm not getting the most out of it. If I'm showing up twice a week, I'm not getting that much out of it, right? Engagement is everything. You want to be going to the gym and you want to be using the weights, right? You need that level of engagement to really make that change. And that's what we're really tracking within this progress here. So thank you all for watching. Howard and I could talk about this program for hours and hours on end. So to condense down our focus into a so far 50-minute presentation with you guys is not the whole picture. So we're happy to meet outside of this and give more information. Sandra as well has provided her contact here for you to reach out to set everything up. And our big goal really is improving quality of life, making changes that you're seeing on your end, either for yourself or your child, to live in a world where you feel better about yourself and there's more potential and more opportunities. So that's what we strive for in terms of helping our students and as well.
Yeah, and thanks, Josh. And I think when I was teaching at the University of British Columbia in the Faculty of Education, I was teaching teachers who were in training, who are going to be certified mostly in British Columbia. I had a course, my course was on learning disabilities, and I would teach from learning disability textbooks. Now, this is before I knew about the Arrowsmith program. And one of the biggest gaps in the field of learning disability, even in attention deficit with learning disability or autism with learning disability, because there's a lot of comorbidity. And the reason there's a lot of comorbidity is they're all struggling with executive functioning. But there was also always a chapter on assessment, Josh. And the big problem in the field was that assessment didn't match intervention, that assessment almost stood on its own, that you go do a psych ed assessment, you get an IQ test, you get some achievement testing, and there might be recommendations for reading programs. But there wasn't anything that sort of matched the assessment results with the treatment that you should get for those issues. Because back then, there wasn't really anything if you had a memory problem or a reasoning problem or a processing speed problem. It was just live with it. And what really astonished me about Barbara's work is that the only reason we test a child is to make sure we have the right program delivery, the intervention. And as they move through the intervention, we do yearly updates to see how they're doing on the assessment side. So the assessment to intervention piece is so finely tuned in the Arrowsmith program. As a lecturer at a university, that also intrigued me, not just seeing the changes in the kids and the adults going through it, but the type of assessment to intervention was, I think, a validity to me that Barbara was actually doing something the field needed to have done, which is improved why you do testing. I mean, why do testing to just get a label, right? Which is really often what happens today. Oh, I need the label so I can get funding so my kid can get resource room. Basically, cover the cost of another teacher. Where Barbara is, no, that's not the purpose of assessment. The purpose of assessment should be not getting a label, but intervening in the area of neural development that's causing the disability.
Yep.
And that's what's brilliant about her work.